Karen, just to be clear, you didn't do it.
We know who did it, Steve. We know. And we know who spearheaded this cover-up. You all know.
Yes, we do.
If John was beaten up and attacked in that house, who did it?
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know. And it's not for us to know. Somebody other than Karen is responsible for that, for the killing of John.
You are listening to the Roberta Glass True Crime Report, putting the true back in true crime. From New York City, Roberta Glass is now on the record.
Okay, here we go. My guest, Shelley Levesey, is a criminal defense lawyer and writer working out of her hometown of Shawnee, Oklahoma. In her bio of her new memoir, she writes about, oh, no, it's in their bio. I'm sorry, Shelley. In her bio on her website, she writes of herself, I am a domestic violence survivor. I have dedicated my life to advocating for victims and spreading the message love shouldn't hurt. To talk about her new memoir, Love Isn't Always the Answer, and to discuss the red flags of Kara Reed's behavior towards John O'Keefe is Shelley Levesey. Welcome, Shelley.
Well, thank you for having me, Roberta. Happy to be here.
I also wanted to mention she's also the lawyer who just represented me in my fight against to get back my channel and against these malicious copyright strikes, and I thank her for that. But I was just really shocked to read your memoir. It does not read it at all. I really thought it would be more lawyerly, and it's much more honest and shocking than I ever could imagine. So why did you title your memoir, Love Isn't Always the Answer?
So I thought about it long and hard, and I felt like at that time in my life, like I had all of these things going for me except for love. And so I had this idea in my head that if I just found love, then everything was going to be complete and everything would be good. And obviously that was not the case. It actually almost ruined my life. And so that's why I decided to title that. I think sometimes that we as women think, that once we find a guy or we fall in love, that everything's going to be great. Well, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, we'll get to how it almost ruined your life and it really threatened your law license. It made you a criminal defendant, really. So why do you think you were a target for your abuser?
So at the time that I met him, the few months before that, I lost my grandmother, who was really like my only grandparent that was alive when I was growing up. And I also had lost my job at the DA's office a few months before. So I had kind of just gone into private practice a few months beforehand. And so I think I was still pretty naive. I grew up like going to a Christian school. I went to a Baptist college, and then I went to law school and at the DA's office. But I think I'd been very naive and sheltered at that point. And I think he spotted that. And I think he spotted that like I could be a caring person and really like to help my clients. And I think there was some part of him that was able to recognize, hey, this is somebody that I can manipulate.
And also you had some power. He called, I mean, the way you put it, he called out to you like, hey, are you a lawyer? I mean, it seemed like he knew that you would be a useful tool for him too. I thought.
Later
So
on,
what?
his brother actually told me later on that he was like saying to them, I know I need to get me a lawyer, and if I get a guy, I'm going to make him my best friend, and if I get a girl, I'm going to make her fall in love with me. And so I think he definitely had a plan that I need somebody on my side.
Yeah, and so you talk about being naive. What are you taught in law school about like the character? Are you taught anything about the characters that you might represent, or
No,
or,
law
or
school teaches
psychology or
law school teaches you
personalities?
nothing about the practice of law. You learn all of that on the job. And so you may learn the philosophy of why laws are, what the laws are, how you came to make the laws. You may learn how to make objections, how to argue in court, how to do trials, but you learn nothing about actual practice. You don't learn anything about, I mean, you learn the ethical rules, but as far as like how to interact with clients and what you should expect and boundaries you should put up, law school does not prepare you for any of that. And coming from being at the prosecutor's office where you didn't have clients, you represent the people. So you may talk to victims, but it's a very different atmosphere. So going from that into private practice as a solo, you're kind of like a fish out of water.
Do you? I mean, do you think that's good? So what is it like when you go from being a assistant DA to working in the DA's office to being a defense lawyer? How are you getting clients, and what's that like?
So it's very different at first. It's very different just going into general practice. So at first, I got most of my clients from other attorneys, attorney referrals, and then just kind of started putting myself out there, and I started getting more. And when you do a good job in the criminal world, then your name kind of gets out there and you get a lot of word of mouth referrals. But at first, yeah, you're just trying to figure it out. And in answer to your question, no, I think that law schools should do a much better job about preparing people for the practice of law. And it's why any law students I ever talk to, you need to intern places and learn as much as you can about what you want to do uh, practically, because you're not going to learn that in law school.
So, reading your memoir, you had your abuser's drug addict sister doing filing for you, and she was stealing checks and having her husband, your abuser's brother, sign these checks and cash these checks. I mean, other times you had other people like smoking a lot of pot related to him, smoking a lot of pot in your home. I mean, you really put yourself at such risk. What were you thinking at the time, and what was your motivation for doing those things?
So some of it I was just not thinking. Some of it I thought I was trying to help people. So like his sister-in-law originally started, it was very simple stuff. She wasn't doing any legal work, but she was like filing my files for me, and she needed a job. And I thought, well, maybe I can like show her a better way. And so that it started out as I thought I could help her with her in particular. And then I just was so stupid at that time, stupidly naive in that all these people were on drugs. And of course, you can't trust people that are on drugs uh, to work in your office or to not steal from you. I would certainly never make that decision now. But at the time, I just was not used to those kinds of people, or people that had addictions and how that changes you. And so I don't know what I was thinking, but I clearly wasn't thinking, but I just didn't anticipate people doing that because I'd never been around people like that.
Mhm. And you also talk about having a lot of empathy and wanting to help.
Hmm.
Um, how did that factor? How did that factor into your to being coercively controlled? And I mean, you write that you graduated, in the top 10% of your class. I mean, like, I looking at your reviews, they're amazing. We won our case, great lawyer. Wondering how can someone be so smart in one area of their life and I guess so stupid or I don't know, so vulnerable in another area. How can you be such like a powerhouse in the courtroom and such a victim kind of in a private life? How does that work out?
So my mom used to say when I was younger, and it would irritate me that I had all the book smarts in the world, but very little common sense. And looking back at it, I'm like, well, that kind of makes sense. But I don't know that it was necessarily common sense. It was more like I just didn't have street smarts because I just hadn't dealt with those kind of people before. But I absolutely think in all coercive control relationships and almost all abusive relationships, they pick people that are empathetic and that are people pleasers and that want to caretake. And that's typically those type people end up with narcissists because narcissists recognize that and they realize, okay, this person's going to want to do everything to make me happy and to please me. And, they'll do whatever and they'll take whatever kind of abuse I throw at them because they want to make me happy. And so I don't think that's unique to me. I think that's very common of victims of abusive relationships because I think that's who people target. Because if you're not naturally bent that way, I don't think you would go down the path I went down.
That's really interesting. Let's circle back to that in a minute when we talk about Karen Reed and John O'Keefe. So how did you get convicted for harboring a fugitive? I mean, how did that whole thing go down and how did you get out of it?
So it had been a lot of things happened. But at some point he had been placed on probation for things he had done to me and things he had done to other women in his life. And he was on probation and he was playing fast and loose with the probation rules, doing just enough to get by, and eventually failed some drug tests and got caught with that. And so he was facing a probation violation. And, all this would have stopped if I had just not bonded him out on that probation violation. But I stupidly did, believing that he was going to go seek treatment and go back to rehab with the VA or with somewhere and go back into treatment. Of course, he didn't go back into treatment. He, on the day of his court date, goes up to the VA, gets admitted, but he has court that day, and a warrant gets issued because he's not there for court. And then he gets out a few days later. And so I had obviously hired an attorney for him, like I did, and I spoke with his attorney and we were going to reset his court date, which is something that kind of happens a lot. People miss court dates a lot. That's not that uncommon. But the problem with that was it kind of couldn't be set for a few weeks off for the attorney schedule, some jury terms. And so set it and the warrants were out. Well, I continued to still help him in the same way I always had because, he didn't work. He depended on me for everything, for food, for money, for this. He wasn't living with me at the time because it had gotten drastically worse, but I was still helping him. And I knew there was a warrant, but it just didn't dawn on me really that technically was harboring a fugitive. Once my head became clear, I was like, oh, well, yeah, that technically is harboring a fugitive because I was giving him money for food. I was taking food for him. But that's the sense that I was harboring. It wasn't like I was hiding him or he was in my house. But that's
Were
what
you
I was
asked
doing.
where he was and did you give a different, did you
No.
kind of hide him?
No one ever asked me where I was. And that was actually something that kind of came up.
Where he was. I'm sorry, where he
Right.
was. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
no one ever
Okay.
asked me where he was. No one came to my house looking for him or anything like that. And that was something that was interesting with the bar because they asked, like, what would you have done? And I was like, well, I wouldn't have lied. Even making dumb decisions, I wouldn't have lied to a cop. I don't know if I would have said this is exactly where he is, but I had told his bondsman where he was, and they were just going to let him surrender at the court date. But I should not have been helping someone with a warrant. And so that's where the charges came from. And I was sentenced on that to probation. That was completed a long time ago, and I'm actually going to be applying for a pardon soon. I was suspended from practicing for a year and then got my license back after a year in 2020. And I've been practicing since and haven't had any contact with him either since 2019.
So this conviction still stands, and you have your law license back.
Yes.
That's an interesting dichotomy. Who did you pick as your lawyer, and how did you pick someone to defend you
So
in this case?
in my criminal case, I had a man named Kent Bridge who was very well respected. And so I hired him. And then for the bar stuff, I had a friend of mine who's another attorney and really knew the whole situation, Carlos Henry, and he represented me through that. And honestly, the situation with the bar was just as difficult, if not more, than the criminal case. But the Supreme Court decides what happens to lawyers when they get in trouble. And so we had all those hearings, and the Supreme Court said, yes, she violated the law, but this was not really her misusing her license or something we see happening again. We see that this totally happened because she was a victim of domestic violence. And so that's why they only gave me a year suspension as opposed to something else.
And you write in your book that you thought the press was unfair, Carmela Riley, thanks so much for the super sticker. I appreciate it. You write in your book that you thought the press was unfair or one-sided. What was one-sided about the press on your case?
Well, part of it was more very much just like, this is a lawyer that did something stupid, not really going into like asking how I would have gotten there or why, or looking at the fact that the guy was clearly very abusive just based on his criminal history. So I felt like that was kind of unfair, that they didn't really look into that. And they would say things like, I'm sure she's never going to be able to practice again and things like that. But now that I'm kind
you
of
had the last laugh there, didn't you?
right. So ultimately only being suspended for a year was a win for me. Obviously, it was a hard lesson. I hated not being able to practice for a year, but very thankful that I was able to go back to practicing, and I'm doing better than ever in my private practice now. But at the time, it seemed very unfair.
Yeah. What did this whole experience change the way that you dealt with your clients, or how did it change the way that you approach the criminal justice system?
Well, dealing with clients, I have a lot more boundaries, and I went to counseling and really took to heart that no is a complete sentence, and trying to set those boundaries instead of feeling bad and taking on everyone's sob stories that I have to save them. It's I still am very empathetic for my clients, and I like to get them the best deals possible and second chances and help people, but I keep a much better distance now, and I'm also trust I don't know that I would say trust but verify, but I'm a lot less believing of what people just tell me without more information.
Yeah, you learn so much, don't you, Shelley, from these sleazebag people? Every sleazebag person that I've met in life has, taught me so much, and
You do.
I use so much of it, in my, I always say like, oh, send them to, where the real hustlers are and the real manipulators are. Some of these people from these ivory tower situations, because
Right.
you get a lot of insight into the criminal element and the criminal mind, and not just the criminal mind, the human mind, and how easily we're all manipulated. And so there's like a zero, like there's like 1,000 million cons out there that you can fall for. I love when people say, like when I talk about cults or I talk about abusive relationships, people say, not me, not me. What do you say when people say, oh, I would never fall for something like this, or I would never be in this kind of relationship, or I never do stupid things?
I probably would have said the same thing until it happened to me, but what people don't understand, it's the same thing. And predators are predators, regardless of what their thing is. So, like cult leaders and abusive people have a lot of things in common because that's kind of a side interest of mine. But also, like child sexual abusers, we talk about grooming with child sexual abusers, and that's how they end up getting children to not say anything is because they were groomed. But grooming happens with all these predators. And the cons or like romance scams, which I'm fascinated by. But people are like, oh, well, how would you be so stupid to send this money? Well, because no one started out asking for money the day they talked to you, or they didn't hit you the first day they met you. Like they groom you into making you feel like you're the most special person in the world. There's no one like you, and make you feel so wonderful and love bomb you, and you feel great, and then you feel like no one else is ever going to make you feel that way, and then they start tearing you down slowly, and it's a process. And by the time you're already being torn down, you're already so far in, it's hard to get out.
Mm.
So it's definitely not a simple, well, that would never happen to me. Well, okay, you may already be a year into a relationship before they come in. I think it's pretty common of domestic violence victims that there wasn't physical abuse until later on, like after they've already said I love yous, or they're engaged, or things like that. It's not going to come out immediately.
And I think you talk about your abuser crying in your office for the first time. Were there supposed to be tears of joy that he met you, or what was he crying about, and where do you think those tears came from?
So, like with all people, I say this even about him. I don't think people are 100% evil or 100% good. He was crying over his children and not getting to see his children. But in part, he was very narcissistic. Was he crying because he really missed his children, or was he crying because he had lost control over his wife and children? But at the time, it seemed really real that he was really upset. And, he was a veteran that had PTSD. And I saw that. I saw that he had these issues. And, you know, so when I first met him, I'm thinking, okay, well, he'd been in the military and had served overseas and all these things. So I thought, well, he can't be this horrible person, and been married for all this time. And well, a lot of that's typical of narcissist. But I mean, to me, I'm seeing a man just really upset over not being able to see his kids. And so that got to me, and he kind of wore me down. And I think he saw that, like, I was moved by that and probably played it up some.
Mhm. And what do you mean that's typical of narcissists? Do you mean they do well in society, or that they what did you mean having a wife and having a career in the military was typical of narcissists?
Oh, that wasn't exact. I was meaning more that typical of narcissists, like when you lose control, that you have emotion. I'm
Oh,
sorry, my
okay.
dog just went
Okay,
off.
thank you. Okay, I was unclear.
That you lose control. But on the other hand, though, narcissists can be very charming and likable. And he had won awards in the military, and I think he was liked by other people. And I would say, I'm sure in whatever prison he's in, he probably is like running the block, because he always was that way. People thought he was charming. And so narcissists in general can be very likable and very charming. So that doesn't necessarily preclude them from doing well in life. The problem is they don't keep very close relationships very long.
So before I go into the Karen Reed case, what were you going to do if you lost your law license in that year where it kind of hung in the balance? did you have plans if if you went the other way against you?
My undergrad was in music. I had taught piano before, so I was doing that during that year. I was also working as a paralegal, and I was continuing to do more music stuff. And so, worst case scenario, I was going to do that. It was around that time I started writing. Not that I thought I was going to make a career off of that at that point, but that's when I started doing it in part for therapy, my own personal therapy. But I'd always wanted to write, so I was always hoping I was going to be back shortly, but I was making plans to do what I had to.
So I'm just gonna, as a defense lawyer, I just wanted to show you this clip from the Karen Reed case. So, we were all shocked watching Karen Reed's trial. This is a hearing before her second trial. And watching the lawyers just lie repeatedly to the court in their filings. Some of the things they lied about were that they put up a defense expert on the stand. So it's kind of a complicated situation. I think you're familiar with the Karen Reed case somewhat, in that Karen Reed got this federal investigation going, whether through her lawyer's contacts or her own. It's really unclear how this started and why they would take this up. But it really cemented this this pre-trial innocence fraud campaign that she had going, that in the public's mind, that there was some kind of conspiracy against her, or that made it look like there was something real there, because otherwise the feds wouldn't get involved, right? I mean, they ended up closing the investigation and found nothing. But so they said that they had these expert witnesses. They were hired by the feds, that the prosecution could have used them but didn't. These witnesses only used information given to them by the defense, never contacted the prosecution. And then when they were on the stand, they asked them if they were paid by the defense, and they answered, no, we haven't been paid, which is sort of like a borderline. I would call that a full-out deceptive answer. I mean, makes it seem like they're like, oh, we haven't been paid. He didn't say yet,
Right.
Turns out they were getting paid. They did all this rule, discovery violation, Rule 14 violations, where they just wouldn't hand over discovery, and then they took the punishment of these pointless voir dires where the prosecution didn't know what to ask. So they were constantly sandbagging the prosecution and not handing over any information about their witnesses they were put up, or what they had found. It was just like amazing. But here, I just want to show you this clip where they are reprimanded by the judge for their repeated mischaracterizations to the court. And just have your take a listen here.
I think I told counsel before that I had reviewed. So first we had full hearing from counsel. I heard from the lawyers. I heard from Mr. Alessi on behalf of the lawyers. I've read the transcripts. I've listened to the sidebar conference and read that transcript. And I've certainly read the pleadings. So based on all the evidence, I conclude that there has not been the candor required of all lawyers has not been demonstrated here. I find that there have been repeated misrepresentations made to the court by defense counsel, and I conclude that they were deliberate concerning the relationship with the ACCA witnesses. They were made at sidebar, in open court, and in pleadings. And I think the record is pretty clear, and I find that on July 25th, 2024, payment was made to the ACCA witnesses. Yet on February 26, 2025, in a pleading written by Ms. Little, signed by all three defense counsel, says the Commonwealth's motion to exclude these exculpatory expert witnesses, ARCA witnesses, who were not hired or paid for by the defense, is not made in good faith and is a desperate and transparent attempt to keep exculpatory testimony of neutral expert witnesses from reaching the jury in this case. The next page. Ironically, the Commonwealth accuses the defendant of failing to comply with her discovery obligations while conceding that the information is not in her care, custody, or control. Moreover, here, the defense has gone above and beyond its reciprocal discovery obligations and has already satisfied all of its mandatory discovery obligations under Rule 14 and turned over all additional information in the control and custody of the defense relating to the ARCA witnesses as ordered by the court. So I find or conclude that that was a material misrepresentation and that it was deliberate. So I find that there is a flagrant violation of the Rule 14 obligations.
And nothing happened to them. I mean, nothing
Wow.
happened. And not only that, all their communications were done between these witnesses for the second trial were done on the Signal app with auto delete. And then they said they deleted all their, email communications. So it's just like they had nothing to hand over. And how they prepared for trial or what they were talking about, nothing. It was all done in secret. And that was pretty much on every witness. It was, they didn't lie and say they weren't being paid on every witness, but, they just hid some element of discovery, it seemed, from pretty much from the majority, if not all of their witnesses in this trial. It was shocking. How was your reaction as a defense lawyer to that?
That's very shocking. I would be horrified if a judge ever said something like that to me. And I could tell you in Oklahoma, if you didn't comply with the discovery, probably you're not going to get to call those witnesses. It's probably going to be the consequence of that, or at least there's going to be a continuance to provide that and make sure the other side has it. But you could definitely have been sanctioned for her finding a material misrepresentation or lying in a pleading, not that it was some kind of mistake. That's pretty outrageous.
Well, the punishment seemed to be these voir dires, to bring in these witnesses that they were going to put on for voir dires, where they could ask them anything. But what do you know to ask if you don't know anything, if you don't know what they're talking about or really what they're going to say, if you're just being given vague information? I mean, it's like...
So experts typically would write some sort of report. Obviously, they were telling them not to write them. But
there
you're
was
also
one
supposed to
report
provide
written, but it was
significant...
like pretty vague. It was pretty vague, is my understanding. Yeah.
Right. So it's not really telling them anything. I mean, typically, I've gotten one of those motions before that, motion for a more definite statement. I think I've done that to the state before. But generally it's just, okay, yeah, I just haven't gotten it to you yet. Not like they just never get it to you. So that's pretty incredible. And I would say is pretty rare. Now, one area where the defense kind of doesn't have to tell everything and that's ethical is your client's testimony. But that's obviously not what she's talking about here. You don't have to reveal what your client's going to say necessarily, because you don't even know if he's going to testify until that time. But that's pretty egregious.
Thank you. It's just like so crazy. I could go on and on about all the things they did with the witnesses in this case. It's just shocking. The one witness from ARCA, his wife was in the Free Karen Reed Facebook group after, trial. I mean, just like wild stuff. The feds were breaking the order so that they weren't supposed to know what anybody else was testifying, any of the experts, and the feds were calling these witnesses and communicating to them in the first trial what the prosecution witnesses were saying. I mean, we thought, and the prosecutor put in a motion. You said, you mentioned in Oklahoma that they wouldn't be able to testify. And I thought, this judge cannot invite these lying ARCA witnesses who perjured themselves and reward the lawyers who, the lawyers who basically, elicited this perjured testimony out of them, to have these witnesses back in the court to lie to another jury. Again, it was just so, and she did. She was like, "Oh, I'm not going to bar them. They're free to come in." I mean, it's like, it was so crazy. The whole thing was just wild, for sure. I just wanted to share that. So when we talk about coercive control, I think your story is a little bit of actually a living example of just how you can have how people are multifaceted, and they can have certainly big chasms of difference between what's going on in their professional life and their personal life, or what's going on behind closed doors and how they present. I think that in this case, when we look at a police officer, we think of police officers as very savvy and very knowledgeable of all sorts of criminal types. It's just shocking that he would be, in a relationship with a woman who, if you look at the text messages, is just not respecting his boundaries at all. He's telling her to stop calling. She's calling, texting. In addition of other red flags, and especially because he's a man. I think it's like this macho. What do you know about men who get involved in TV relationships?
Well, it certainly happens. It's probably a little bit rarer than it is with women, just because of how roles happen. But I mean, I've seen it in my private practice for sure, that there are, women that are coercively controlling, that, demand to know where somebody is at all times, controls the finances, controls who you can see and not see, and that it can be physically violent. So that certainly happens. I think sometimes men that are in those situations kind of feel trapped because, if the woman is attacking them and truly attacking them, and they fight back, likely they're going to be the one that goes to jail, because if they strike the woman back, they're going to cause more damage. And almost every abuser, male abuser, that's always their thing. I wish she was attacking me. So it's very a hard position for a man to be in if they have a woman attacking them, of how to deal with that, because sometimes they're also embarrassed and they don't want to say, like, some woman's attacking, beating them up, because they somehow thinks that belittles them. But then also, just realistically, like, not everyone believes that a man can be a victim. Well, anyone can be a victim. It's the same process. Just, some men are kind of pretty laid back and just, they'd rather just not fight and go along to get along. And, if you're with the wrong partner, that can be very dangerous.
Yeah. And when I talked to his friend, I interviewed one of his oldest friends, Brendan Kane, who grew up with him. And he said something like, like he would have held his own, or, he felt like he kind of had to, he recognized these red flags, and yet he sort of wanted to defend him, sort of meaning that if he was a victim to these behaviors, it somehow made him less masculine or less, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting. Here's, let me just show you this, speaking of asking where he is, and let me show you, this is Brendan Kane on your left side of your screen after, and it's got a title over it, and John O'Keefe's on the right. And I ask about the history of this picture. Take a listen.
But I kind of forgot about it a little bit in the context, but we took a picture on Lansdowne Street. It was the last Red Sox game we ever went to. It was the fall of 21. And that was the other piece with Johnny was there's always great parking. He'd always get you great parking. BPD would take care of their own on the parking. So we go to Fenway, we have a good spot, and we went into the Lansdowne bar, and he wanted to take a picture, and I'm sure I said something like, "Why? Like, what are you doing?" And his response was essentially he had to prove to Karen where he was and who he was with. And I found that very odd, and that was like my first red flag where my spidey senses were tingling. Like, wait, what? I know some couples share a location and such. I share my location with my wife for safety, not because she's worried about where I am. So that was the first kind of view I had into any concerning component of their relationship. But I love that. I don't care why at this point. I'm glad I have that picture. It's on my wall. I think our teeth look good. We have good teeth. So from that perspective, it's like I'm very thankful I've got it. It's one of the last memories I'll share with him. But yeah, to further complicate the matter and give context to how it played out. Maybe in August of 21, I should have had more concerns than I did. But it's tough to tell your 40-something-year-old buddy, like, hey man, that's weird. Don't do that.
Yeah, it says, tell your buddy that's weird. Don't do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw, it's like just kind of in a very small picture, but he was also sending pictures on his last day alive to Karen Reed to prove that he was with his father. So, he said, like, I can't remember exactly what the content of the text is, something about the man on the couch next to me, and there's like a picture of his father. So he was also doing that on the last day of before he was murdered. So if you said something like that to a friend, don't do that, that's weird. Is that effective?
So it depends on where you're at and how the friend says it. So it's kind of like, oh, I think we have to tell our friends when things are not right like that. But if you come across too much, you're liable to turn that friend away, and then they may not tell you things. So we absolutely should be telling our friends when we see things like that, like, hey, that's a little out of bounds. Like my partner doesn't do that to me. And maybe try and approach it that way. That sometimes if you just come right out and say, like, dude, that's not right, you need to break up with her, and they want to stay, then they're liable to kind of turn off. So we absolutely should be telling our friends, family when we see stuff, but we have to kind of be careful how we do that, because we don't want them to then not talk to us. After that, we want them to have a safe place to come back to and say, hey, I've been thinking about that, and you're right, help me get out.
Yeah. Why is, we saw in the O.J. Simpson case, that was tried as a DV case. This case was not. Instead, it was Karen Reed was painted as a jealous girlfriend. And one of the more ridiculous things the prosecution put up is that when they were on their way to a get-together after the bars closed at a friend's house, that they'd gotten directions and that the house was close to a woman that John O'Keefe used to date, and that made Karen Reed burst into a jealous fury over that. So we heard all repeated insistence that she was jealous. How is abusers' relationships, which is really like kind of a need for power and control, how is that confused with jealousy, or why is it so easily confused with jealousy?
Well, I think that there's kind of normal jealousy that probably every relationship has a little bit of that. Like maybe you're jealous of an ex, or someone that they had a long relationship, or you see a young person talking, a young pretty girl talking to your boyfriend, and maybe you feel a slight twinge. I mean, I think there's that normal thing that all of us kind of feel like, well, I don't like that, I want him to talk to me. And then there's like, you can't talk to anybody extreme, and the coercive control people and is that kind of extreme. Like, why are you getting upset that something happens to be near someone that he used to date? Like, that's not a normal reaction. If, he told you, I'm going to go have dinner with my ex at her house, okay, maybe you get upset about that, but just being in a near vicinity. And so I wouldn't consider the power and control dynamics that you can kind of see, the calling a million times a day and calling and cussing somebody out and demanding that. That's not just normal jealousy or even just extreme jealousy. That's part of power and control. And I think usually when you're seeing extreme jealousy, it's almost always a part of a power and control. And sometimes it's not real obvious, but that kind of goes to the isolation of incoercively controlled relationships. It kind of starts with, you want to go see your friends and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to be left alone. I guess if you want to go do that, go do that. And they're not directly saying don't go, but they're kind of guilt tripping you out of going. And then it kind of becomes more and more often that then you're not going and seeing those people because they're like, well, I just want you to be with me. And, we're happy in this enmeshment idea that Hollywood does that, oh, all you need is your other person. And so I think sometimes that's where people get things confused, that extreme jealousy is not normal. That's not healthy in any relationship. So when you're seeing those signs, you should be thinking, okay, there may be a power and control issue here.
Right. You write about in your book about how your abuser would say to you, your friends don't really like you. They don't like, they're rolling their eyes when you talk. Can you talk about what the strategy of that was?
He was playing on
do that?
He was playing on my own insecurities, and somehow he picked up on that. I don't really know how these kind of people pick up on your weaknesses, but somehow they are able to see it and spot it. And so that would be some of my own insecurities, that like I wasn't super popular, like I was the smart kid, but I wasn't the popular kid, and kind of feeling a little bit isolated or outside. And so I think he picked up on that. And then when you're already kind of feeling like, people don't really like me, and then somebody says that like is always telling you these good things about you, and you're thinking, well, why would he say that if that weren't true? And then it's like, well, I guess I was right. Those people really aren't my friends. And so I think he was able to recognize insecurities, and then they push those buttons on insecurities to make you more dependent on them.
Right, to get any kind of person that's going to point out the red flags away from you. Strangely, what I've noticed is that with abusers is that the people that are oblivious are the people that are allowed to be around you, and that the people they want away from you are the people that might speak up or say something or would be a good safety net for you.
Yes,
they really
absolutely.
Put you in a vulnerable situation.
If it's someone that likes them or, seems to think everything's great, yeah, they're going to be fine with you being around them. But if it's anyone that's like, I don't know about that. He would get furious if I would just like talk to my best friend at the time, just like girl talk. And I mean, he would just get furious. And that was one of the things that he would start, demanding to see my phone, was to make sure I wasn't talking about him. And it was a way of making sure that no one's given me information that this is not good.
Interesting. Take a look at this. This is John O'Keefe's, one of his oldest friends, Brendan Kane, on their Christmas Eve tradition and how Karen Reed changed that. I mean, that's the nicest way to put it, or kept him away from it before the Christmas before he was, this is like a month before he was murdered. Take a listen. What happened on the last Christmas? What happened there? Why didn't you guys celebrate Christmas Eve together?
So this was deep into COVID. This is like 18 months into COVID. So most people had kind of found the level footing with the virus, but we were set to go over there as we had the past 4 or 5 years. And I got a call from Johnny about a couple, maybe 2 or 3 days before. And he said, his exact words were, hey, I got a little problem. There's some concern about COVID, and it's going to be immediate family only. I was like, oh, seriously? Okay. All right. Didn't know. And the irony of that, the story was that at the time Johnny related to me, he said it was actually Paul's wife who had the issue with immediate family only. Had Johnny never been murdered, I never would have found this out. But since it came to light after his killing, it turns out that it was not Paul's wife, Erin, that had any problem with COVID. She was one of the people that was least concerned about COVID. It was Karen. And, we had just been out with them. And, the way I justify it is Johnny wanted to kind of protect our view of Karen. And if we said it was Karen that had the issue, maybe our opinion would change a little bit. But the key to that, and the reason why it hits home, is that I can distinctly remember my daughter crying for 10, 15 minutes that we're never gonna be able to go to Johnny's again after he died. We could never go back over there on Christmas Eve, and for that year until I figured it out, I was blaming Erin, and it was Karen the whole time. So now in hindsight, you look at with all the other behavior and it's just additional red flags that I missed.
Your thoughts? Did you kind of catch the? No, it's
Yes.
short, but yeah.
A few things on that. One, I think narcissists and abusers love to ruin holidays or birthdays or special events. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be a knack of theirs. So that's not surprising. But second of all, that's what victims do, because you don't want other people to hate your partner. So you do make excuses for them, and you maybe blame things on other people, because even though you may still want to be in the relationship, like in the back of your mind, this isn't right, but you don't want other people to not like them. So you fib and you make things up. So that's very typical.
What Karen Reed seemed to do is like ruin things, like make such a big scene. This is when they went to Aruba together. She accused, John O'Keefe was friends with two sisters. One was the mother of, not the mother, I'm sorry, the mother of the baby. I was thinking he's the godfather to the baby, but she was the baby mama to his partner, gave birth to his partner's child after this was his police officer partner, Pat Rogers, ended his life tragically. And John O'Keefe became a support system for her. And, you talked about empathetic person. Certainly, by all accounts, John O'Keefe was that person who was quick to help out. When his sister died, he stepped forward and took care of his niece and nephew as a, primary guardian for them. Although, with his, that's kind of made him a good target for someone like Karen Reed, But anyway, so back to these two sisters. Karen Reed, they were all out in Aruba. It was a big group of them, and Karen Reed accused John O'Keefe of kissing one of them when it was, I don't know, just out of the blue. Nothing like that was going on from the testimony of the two sisters, and caused real division where they're yelling. Karen Reed's yelling obscenities at this woman, and just so it creates like such a terrible unrest, that you don't want to, you end up being isolated in the future from these people. Not that you don't care for them, you're just these upsets that they cause
You don't want to be embarrassed.
Right. It tends to keep these people away if there's just upset, these kind of upsets when the two of you are around. You tend not to get invited or even want to be part of any kind of group friend thing after that. I mean, that was sort of labeled as jealousy, but to me, it's like, kind of creating these events to create an event that will make everyone unhappy and create tensions between everyone so that they don't want to be around, or they won't be. He doesn't want to have them around to see more of that kind of stuff. It's embarrassing, I would think.
Right. I think that's more intentional, because maybe jealousy if like you actually saw something going on and then you got jealous, but when you're just making it up, I think that's more an intentional thing, because, John's going to think twice in the future of wanting to be around them and her because of the last time there was a scene. And you just get on edge of, oh, what are they going to do now? Like, what are they going to say? And so then you just, I'd rather just stay at home or just be around that person because you don't want to take the chance. And I think that people that feel that need to control other people and to have that power over them, they know what they're doing. That's just not a typical jealousy thing. That's an intentional thing to cause a problem. And maybe she wasn't getting enough attention, so like, I'm going to cause a scene, I'm going to get attention.
Yeah, for sure. Why do they need so much attention?
So I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I've tried to study this type a lot. And I think most of these people are narcissistic. And so I think they need this attention because narcissists feel like they're special. But I think that's largely in part from everything that I've read is because they don't really have a great self-image. So all this, like, I'm awesome, is to cover the fact that they have a very fragile self-image. So they need all that attention to, make them feel okay.
What do you want people to understand about this subject? I mean, before we close, I mean, I'm sure that all the Free Karen Reed supporters will say you made a mountain out of a molehill. All these things were just, and it was certainly normalized, all this disturbed behavior in this, mostly normalized in this case. What do you want people to know about it? The subject of coercive control in England, it's actually a criminal crime.
Yes.
Do you think that would be good here, or do you think it would be abused, or what's your thoughts on the subject and law?
I think it would be good. I think it would be difficult to try to prove in a court of law. I think it would be good for it to be against the law. I think it would be hard to prove. But what people need to understand about coercive control is that on its face, it may not look like anything abusive, certainly at first, because coercive control may look like, oh, someone takes their wife or to work every day and picks them up. Oh, that's sweet. Or they make sure they always go to places, and maybe it's sweet, or maybe it's because they don't want them to have their own car, or they don't want them to handle things. And so sometimes coercive control may not be something obvious. It may not be them yelling at somebody in front of you or hitting them. Coercive control is about keeping someone doing what you want. And if they've got you under control without hitting you, they don't need to hit you. You can be coercively controlled without anyone raising a hand to you. It's just whether or not you're doing everything that they want. And so people need to understand that if you see someone that's being isolated, or they're acting different, or they're always on the defensive, it may be because they're just emotionally can't handle it. But also, people that are in coercively controlled relationships are very anxious and they're very exhausted. And so if you see behavior type changes in someone that maybe used to be fairly happy and you just see this sense of exhaustion all the time, they seem, like they just aren't themselves, like maybe ask some questions. It may not be that they're coming to work with black eyes, you know, but it happens a lot more frequently than what people realize.
Yeah, you just brought up a really interesting point. I just have a couple more questions before we end. I was thinking about the Todd Kenhammer trial, where basically this is a man accused of beating to death his wife in a car and trying to make it look like like something fell off a truck and randomly went through the windshield and hit her. And I'm not laughing about it. It was a horrible murder. But the way that they defended it was to say that they were never apart and that they went and got ice cream together. This is the murder of his wife, Barbara Kenhammer. And meaning like he's too nice a guy. I mean, ice cream makes you happy. You know what I mean? Like kind of like the
Right.
kind of that kind of defense. You know what I mean? Thing.
Yeah.
So, but it's sort of like, how does Hollywood not help in this situation? Is what I'm
They
saying.
do not
How
help
does
a lot.
these American myths not help? Yeah.
Well, I mean, you kind of grow up and like the TV shows and the movies that you watch, and you see this like the back and forth and these big grand gestures. Like one thing that we see is like, okay, if you tell a guy no and the guy does all these things to keep pursuing you and eventually you fall in love. Well, one, like maybe they should have just taken your no. That's one thing I think that Hollywood hypes up. Oh, you just got to do these big gestures. And that's one thing. I think another thing is that we get this idea of enmeshment and that you just want to be together all the time and that's healthy. It's normally not. I also am very suspicious of people that have joint Facebooks. Like if you can't trust your partner enough to have a separate Facebook, like I have concerns about your relationship. I'm not saying that means someone's being abused. I just like if you can't be your own person, I have concerns.
Well,
And then
interesting little factoid, just a little factoid to put in that Karen Reed talks about how she wanted, I think it's like the last days alive, she's texting him saying, why didn't you answer my Facebook request? And he's like, you blocked me, so I think it was like a year ago. So like right before she murdered him, she wanted him to accept his friend request is my memory. I hope I'm getting that right. Yeah.
And the other thing is like, and I know it makes for good drama. I mean, it's the same thing with writing books or fiction, or there's no drama unless you have like fights and breaking up and getting back together. So like I totally get why TV shows and movies and books and why we all do that, because it gives you more drama. But a lot of times like that drama that we create and that we think, oh yeah, we love these people on this show. Like Carrie and Big is the most perfect example on Sex and the City. They broke up and got back together and there was always this toxicity back and forth, but that was the love of her life. And I get why we do that on TV. It's not so cool in real life, and I think that we think, oh, well, that just means that he loves me because he did this. No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that.
Yeah, people have done some great compilations showing just how strange their relationship was. Speaking of Big and Carrie Bradshaw, just how, unhealthy it was. The way Big left her on her wedding day. Thank you. I don't have a encyclopedic memory of the show, but yeah. And just her behavior was so awful, so narcissistic and awful throughout that show too. And yet she was our quirky, beloved heroine of that show.
Oh, and I loved the show. Like, I'm not saying that, but like looking at it, if you look at it objectively, like this is not something we should be aspiring to.
Right. I mean, I don't use my oven. I just like could never get over that. I don't use my oven. I just keep my shoes in my oven. It's like, oh boy. Okay. Here's a question for you, Shelley. What What of Alan Drew? Okay. Let me see. Do I have a picture of this? Do you know about this, Shelley? So
No,
Alan
but
Jackson was
I'm
caught.
curious.
Let me see if I have pictures of this. And if I don't, you're going to have to just hold. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'll play you my Alan Jackson song, and maybe you'll appreciate it as a criminal attorney. I've been writing songs here. Here's my Alan Jackson song. But so you'll see two pictures in this. One of him like behind her, like embracing her from behind. And so Karen Reed's hardcore supporters were just told that it was AI, and not even AI, just like created, manufactured, when clearly it wasn't. This was all over the press, and then the New York Post followed up with like an article. Alan Jackson's married, about his lawyer. His wife works in the DA's office in Los Angeles, and they thought maybe he was going to get a divorce after this. And then at Smith and Wolinski, you can see that he's balancing his elbow on his killer client's knee. Take a listen to my Alan Jackson song. Okay, Shelley, thoughts? Is that appropriate?
No. Well, for a number of probably.
Go ahead.
This is what I was saying about the thing I learned from my own things. One, you have to have boundaries between your clients and you. You obviously have to get to know your clients and get to know them well. And if you're going to try cases together, you need to know them, but they shouldn't be your friends. It's just not a good idea. And then personally, I also just think it's probably in bad taste just right after a murder trial where you're accused of getting a
Friends.
DUI.
I mean, he's putting his arms
Right.
up.
Yeah,
like
he's being more than friends. So there's been
okay.
I mean, it's inappropriate, but I also probably wouldn't go have drinks with someone that was just convicted of a DUI. And I mean, somebody died. I don't really think that's really a very good look.
Oh, she wasn't convicted. She wasn't convicted. Oh, yeah, she was convicted of DUI.
Of the
eventually. Yeah,
DUI. She wasn't convicted of anything else, but
No, yeah.
still probably just not. It's not a good idea for many reasons.
I think that was pre-trial, but yeah, it just looks. I mean, it just like between what was the when they were behind her? I think that was before.
Yeah,
the
he was
second
like
trial.
behind her
Yeah.
with his arm around her. That was really
Yeah.
inappropriate.
Yeah, that was the most inappropriate, and they were very successful at convincing the public that that wasn't a real picture. My point about these lawyers is that they did so many dirty tricks and just flat out what I consider. We have charges. We'll see how they play out. I'm not convinced that Aiden Carney. So what they did was they worked with this blogger to harass witnesses, call witnesses murderers, and he has charges for witnesses harassment.
That turtle boy or whoever
right.
he is.
So they did that. I mean, rolling rallies, meaning like they went from witness house to witness house, with signs calling them murderers before trial because Karen Reed needed alternative suspects, and it all worked amazingly, and with the personal weaknesses and also just I think the witnesses being scared into silence and the victim's family assuming that the criminal justice system would take care of it because the facts were so, what they saw was the facts were so clearly, and I obviously agree with them, so clearly in the state's favor that they figured it would be an easy conviction. And I was screaming as loud as I could because I'd covered so many of these
Well, I'm not sure why
reversals.
anyone thought
Yeah.
it would be an easy conviction, particularly after the first trial. I would have thought maybe some different things would have been done between
Yeah.
first trial and second trial, but it certainly wasn't going to be easy the second time after what happened the first time, looking at it,
Yeah, it was just like amazing to me that that the state hired a company to vet the jurors in the second case and in the second trial, same case, second trial, and it was worse than ever. They could not have picked. So, what do you think about those outfits that select? Have you ever used them, and what do you think of them? And that the kind of idea that they're like experts at picking juries.
I have
You know what
never
had jury consultants is what
Yes.
I'm talking about. Confirms, yeah.
I've never had the luxury of having the kind of money to do that or have a case that had the money to spend. But I'm not sure that I would hire one if I did. I think jury selection, it's kind of it's a gut feeling. I think the things that they do might be helpful. Like if you tried things in front of I think what jury consultants would do that would be helpful, like to me, wouldn't be necessarily like picking that jury, but maybe trying things in front of a mock jury and seeing what worked and what didn't. But as far as like going through and picking jurors, some of that we kind of know. So I kind of feel like a lot of that is a waste of money. You kind of know what kind of things you're looking for. If you're a prosecutor or if you're a defense lawyer, you kind of know the topics that you want to know what the jurors' opinions are on. So personally, I don't think it's for me to use
What
one of
kind
those companies.
So I asked, I talked to DA John Lewin, who prosecuted Robert Durst. He's known as King of the Cold Cases. And he talked about how he didn't want actresses or actors on his jury. And I asked him why no actors or actresses. He says, because they always want the unusual. I just want someone who's going to look at the evidence in the case and make a decision. What are some of the things you're looking for on the opposite side of the fence when you're picking a jury as a defense attorney?
Well, I want to know if they have family members or friends in law enforcement. That's one thing. I want to know kind of what their educational background is. Typically, if I can, I want an educated jury that's going to kind of really look through and see what reasonable doubt is. And it kind of depends on the case. Like if it's a gun case and it's a potential self-defense with a gun case, then I want gun owners, that maybe have had to be in that situation. If it's a drug case, I want to make sure and not get anyone who's directly been affected by drug use or family members that have overdosed or things like that. So the biggest things I'm looking for are people that are not going to have hidden biases that they can't set aside, because we have this thought process, that we can all be fair and impartial, and so that's what we're looking for. But there's certain cases that none of us could be fair and impartial in. So it's trying to figure out where are those people that they're absolutely, even if they try their best, are not going to be able to be fair and impartial. If it's a domestic violence case, and I'm defending a domestic abuser, I'm not going to want someone that's been a victim of domestic violence. Child sexual abuse cases, I'm not going to want anyone that's been a victim of child sexual abuse. Who I would want is someone that's maybe known somebody or had somebody that a false accusation was made against them in a custody battle or things like that. So that's kind of more what I'm looking for, people that are going to think through it, really listen to the evidence and not just go, well, he's on trial with something, so he probably did it. So those are the kind of things I'm looking for.
That's a good way to get off jury duty, though.
Well,
Stand up and say, yeah, well, if he's accused of something, he must have done it.
we'll occasionally have people that say crazy stuff, and you can tell that they're just saying that because they don't want to be there. And then there's some people that really
you've gotten
believe
wise
that.
to that scam of just being like, oh, they did something.
Some of them, they're saying it because they really mean it. Some of it, like, you can tell they're just like, you don't want to be here. And I don't want someone that doesn't want to be there, but I also don't want someone that's like too Johnny on the spot wanting to be there, that, wants to answer every question. Like, I had a jury trial in October, and there was a juror in this panel, and this was a very weird jury selection. Like, the whole panel was strange, and the prosecutors and I were all actually really good friends, and we're all just kind of looking at each other because it was just a strange panel. But this one lady was like, I've been a victim of domestic violence, I've been a victim of child sexual abuse, I've been this, and then I've had people put in prison. It was like all these things, like every question she like had a story, and we're like, oh my. And then she's like, I want to really listen, and I want to be able to render a verdict. And so the DAs and I were kind of playing chicken when it came to peremptories, because neither one of us wanted her on the jury. But, I waited and made the state kick her because I had more than just her I wanted to get off. So she was her fifth peremptory challenge, and then I got to get rid of another one. But sometimes when people are too excited to be there, that's scary as well.
Yeah, I went to jury duty, and I told my audience, I said, well, I was taking bets. I said, how fast am I going to get kicked out of there? 10 minutes. 10, I think we got 10 seconds was and I was the only one picked in my group of 50 for the jury. And I ended up being the last juror picked for that case. And the first vote was 11 guilty to 1 not guilty. So they just, we had to turn. It was a child predation case. But what was most shocking to me, and what really stays with me, are two things. One I'm just going to, is these two women were crying. This guy testified. He was a horrible witness. For the defendant testified for himself. He tried to throw the victim and the victim's family, who testified, under the bus. He made all sorts of contradictions and like telling admissions and stuff I just hated him by the time he was done. He should have never testified, I felt. And he would have done better not testifying. Not that it was such a, iffy case, as you can see by the way the vote came down. But they were crying because he was going to be sent. We didn't know what his sentence was or what was on the table for him, especially in New York, and a very liberal judge. But we don't know, and they were just crying for him. And I was just going, oh my, I just couldn't believe it. Here's a family who we gotten to know, whose life was turned upside down by this man's behavior. and they were crying for him. It was amazing, amazing.
It's still hard to, and I get to know my clients, even ones that have done, really bad things. It's still something to think about. Okay, you're doing life in prison and having those conversations as a defense lawyer with a client, particularly if it's a case, we don't have anything here. Having those conversations, it's still a tough thing because even those people have, even if they've done the worst thing, like killed a bunch of people or, raped several children, they have family and different people and, it's still an interesting thing, but that is interesting to know that you had jurors cry. I had probably the worst case I've ever had as a defense lawyer, and it was when I was appointed on, and he had confessed. He insisted on testifying, and he confessed on the stand again, and said the most ridiculous things, like the fates aligned for him to have this sexual affair with a 13-year-old, and I'm trying to throw bones, like, but you wouldn't do this again, right? And he's like, well, it was just bad.
Boy.
It was
What a nightmare client.
It was the worst. It was the worst. And the jury was out like 4.5 hours, and I'm like, what are they out on? Because he'd confessed to everything, and it was so bad that he'd confessed to the detective and what he said on the stand. Like, I couldn't really even argue anything about guilt or innocence because it was so bad. The only thing I was trying to say was about sentencing, and really I couldn't come up with much to say there. But it turned out there was one person, because in Oklahoma juries do sentence. We're one of the 7 states that still do. And that was what it was about, because also jurors can't know if it's going to be consecutive or concurrent time. That's something that the judge decides. And almost every jury asked that question. And, the answer is, it's none of your business, essentially. But one of the witnesses was like, well, I just don't know that I feel comfortable that he could never, ever get out. Well, they eventually came to a thing, but that's apparently what they were arguing about for, 4.5 hours. But we were just, in shock because we're like, what in the world are they back there arguing about? There was no question of guilt. So.
Wow. So much of the time, at least when I was a juror, was letting off steam and wanting to talk about what we perceived as jurors, and seeing how other people perceived witnesses and things, because you're so pent up from not being able to talk about it for so long that you're dying by the time you get to at least I was in my case, and many other people,
I bet.
in my case. Yeah, so much of it is just letting off steam. Shelley Levisay, her book is Love. I'm afraid I'm going to get this wrong. Love is not always the answer. Is that right? Do I get it right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. I was so afraid I was going to get it wrong. The link is in the description of this episode. It's a shocking read if you're expecting a very lawyerly book with lots of wordsmithery. You will be disappointed. But if you run a really very very compelling read, honest read, link is in the description. Shelley Levisay, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks.
I hit my boyfriend with my car. It wasn't an accident, but with lying lawyers I'll go far. Lying lawyers and witness harassment. I'll avoid prison. It was snowing. I pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system I clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim. pushed the pedal down, hit him hard. Now the legal system I clown. Innocence fraud campaign to save my skin. Making money, truth is my second victim.